Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. We are in our final week of our series on grace and judgment. And it's been a challenging series to preach through. I wonder if it's been a hard or challenging series to listen through. But the truth is, it's not, grace and judgment isn't something that I just picked to preach on. We're moving through the lectionary, and these are the texts that have been assigned for these weeks. And I think one of the things that pastors or preachers often have to do as they come up, if it's a series preaching church, and it feels like most churches are these days, is to either pick a series and then find the right passages to go with that series, or to explore a group of passages and try to determine what are the themes that bubble up from these passages, and then therefore how do we name the series. And that's really what I've tried to do here. I didn't say man, wouldn't it be fun to preach about grace and judgment? I read through the passages that were assigned over these weeks, and I read some other books dealing with these passages, and it became really clear that grace and judgment were the themes of these parables of Jesus and the teachings that follow. Grace and judgment are often bound up together in ways that we're unaware of. Last week I offered a few examples, right? A friend tells you the truth. That can be both grace and judgment. A teacher grades your work. That is definitely judgment, and sometimes grace as well. I still don't know exactly what I mean by this, but I think I'm more convinced of it than I was last week. But a parent declares his or her love for you. Certainly grace. It may be judgment as well. And it's important to remember that judgment doesn't equal punishment, right? When we talk about judgment, it can certainly include punishment, but it's not as if the two are completely coterminous, that they're completely equal, that one is just the other. Judgment means making things right. Judgment means making things right. And in the string of parables that we've heard Jesus speak over the last 3 weeks, in this teaching that he offers us today, he calls the chief priests and the Pharisees to see themselves rightly by trying to help them see all the ways that they are missing God. Right? And not just missing God in the abstract. They're not wrong in their ideas about God necessarily. And I think that's really important for us to remember as Gentile Christians as we read through the Gospels. It's super easy to turn the Jews into bad guys, right? And I don't think that I have to point out to you that that's therefore what makes anti-Semitism super easy, right? It's easy to turn the Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, the Sadducees, the rulers of the synagogue, it's easy to just turn them into the bad guys, when what I think the gospel writers are doing is a bit more subtle than that. They're using them as a foil for Jesus. The foil is not always an antagonist in the story, which is to say they're not always the bad guy. They are used to heighten the difference between the protagonist and whatever the protagonist, or the good guy, the white hat, is up against. Jesus clearly is the protagonist of the Gospels, and actually of the whole Bible. But Jesus, what he's doing when he confronts the religious leaders, he doesn't just want to punish them. He doesn't want to humiliate them. He doesn't want to send them away. He's not actually even trying to necessarily replace them. He's calling them in. You have misunderstood God. And because you are leaders of the people, you are misleading the people. I'm calling you back in. I'm calling you to understand God rightly by receiving me. And I think it's important for us to remember that as we read through these teachings of Jesus, as you read through any of the Gospels especially, that it's not new agey or weird to try to settle yourself within the passage, to try to imagine what it would be like to be there hearing Jesus. These are intended to address us. These are not only historical documents that require historical exploration. They are theological documents by which God is continuing to speak. It's easy because of our love for Jesus, because of our love for God, because of the understandings that we've received through generations of being the church and being in the church. It's really easy for us to be the disciples when Jesus is confronting the religious authorities. It's easy for us to assume that we are on the side of the circle that Jesus is on, and we're like, yeah, you guys need to straighten up. Fair enough. Remember how often the disciples misunderstand Jesus, even though they're committed to following him through their misunderstanding. But there are times when I, especially as a religious leader, find it way more helpful to imagine myself as a chief priest or a Pharisee or a scribe or a teacher of the law, and to hear Jesus confront my assumptions about what I think I know is right or what I think I know is best for the community of God's people, and to call me back. I don't hear Jesus saying, "You're so..." There are times for sure, it's confrontational. Woes upon the Pharisees, right? Those are hard to hear. Those are hard to hear. But Jesus only pronounces that word of judgment in order to also deliver the word of grace, which is you can come home. You can come back. You can see yourself rightly. You can see God rightly. The word of judgment always, always, always also includes the word of grace. So this morning, as we enter into this really confrontational text between Jesus and the Pharisees, and you know it's confrontational because the Pharisees actually bring along a group that they are completely opposed to, the Herodians. And they're like, let's get him, right? The Pharisees, these are Jews from which today's rabbinic Judaism descends. These are people who are really concerned about keeping the law, maintaining purity within the community of Israel. And Herod, as king of the Jews, is an affront to the Pharisees because Herod himself is not a Jew. He's actually descended from Esau. He's an Idumean. So he's related to the Jews, but he's kind of moved into this space and set himself up as king of the Jews. And in order to do that, he has to collude with Rome. The only way that he gets to be king of the Jews is if the Romans are like, yeah, okay, you can be king of the Jews. Funny side story, when Anderson was 2, he heard a story in which Jesus was called the King of the Jews, and then he played King of the Jews at home. I'm the King of the Jews, he said. It's never not fresh at home. You know it's confrontational because the Pharisees and the Herodians, who do not see eye to eye, who are not on the same team, who have a different end game in mind for the Jewish people and how they can be God's people and how they can have power and authority and exercise it in the world. You know this is a confrontational text for Jesus because they are teaming up to try to trap him. And so as we enter into this text, as we have the opportunity to see, as we have the opportunity to be addressed by this text, my prayer is that in this reading and teaching of Scripture, we'll have eyes to see as well, ourselves rightly and God rightly, and to come home to him. So as I've said, they're trying to trap Jesus, and it's actually a really clever question. Right? They say, "Teacher, we know that you are true." They flatter Jesus. Flattery is the fastest way to most public figures' hearts. right? All you have to do is tell them how great they are, how important they are, and how much you need them, and they'll come around. Teacher, we know that you are true, and you teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And this is really very clever, because what happens is if Jesus says no, he's a rebel. And they can say, you oppose Caesar. And they can go to Pilate, and they can go to Herod, and they can say, this man opposes Caesar. He's a rebel. Let's have him arrested, right? Which is what they've been trying to do all along. But if he says yes, well, then he's a false prophet. He's colluding with Rome. He's not someone who speaks on behalf of God anymore because he's compromised. He's working for Caesar. Right? And you have to remember that it's not just the Pharisees and the Herodians and Jesus' followers. Anywhere Jesus goes, and especially in Jerusalem, which is where he is in this text, and he's there for Passover, right? Lots of people are there for Passover. They've come from, if you have read the book of Acts, you know that they've come from all around the Roman Empire to celebrate the Passover. And so there are large crowds of people who are witnessing these kinds of confrontations in the lead up to Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. They are trying to trap Jesus. Either he's a rebel or he's a false prophet. There's no way he's getting out of this one. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." He said to them, "Therefore render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." Do we ever do this to Jesus? I mean, in our own hearts and with our own lives and with our own circumstances. Surely we don't ever try to trap Jesus. We're not trying to have him arrested and crucified. But do you ever find yourself asking, and this is way more of a youth group question than I'm comfortable with, but I was a youth pastor for a while. But do you ever find yourself asking, like, Jesus, did you really mean that? Did you really mean I have to love my enemies? Did you really mean that I have to turn the other cheek? Did you really mean that I should pray for those who persecute me? Did you really mean that I should make restitution for the things that I've stolen and return it to those from whom I've stolen it? Did you really mean to sell all of my belongings and give it to the poor and then come follow you? Did you really mean that? But it could be way more specific too, right? It could be about your life and your prayer time and the things that you're asking Jesus for guidance on. Jesus, did you really mean I shouldn't take that job? Jesus, did you really mean I should take that job? I don't think it always works out that way. Jesus isn't like a puppet master. He's not behind the scenes saying, do what I want, do what I want, do what I want. But he's always calling you in. He's always calling you in. And it takes discernment on the part of people who would follow Jesus to figure out the best way in. Sometimes it's like a flash of lightning and you just know. And maybe you still do or do not want to do it. But do we ever do this to Jesus? Do we try to trap him in his words? Because we often want things both ways, don't we? We want all the good things that we can get. Even if sometimes getting those good things means even if getting those good things are opposed to each other, right? We want as much good as we can gather. And this is because we're often unaware of what forces are at work in forming us and discipling us. Let me explain. We don't exist in a world of neutrality. We're not just walking through the world and it's like, the bank is neutral, my university is neutral, my employer is neutral, my culture is neutral. All of these things are working on you. They're asking for parts of your heart. They're asking for parts of your allegiance. They're asking for you to want them, right? Why do advertisers spend so much money on advertising? They want your money, but they know the way to your money is through your heart. If they can convince you that having their product or having their service is going to make your life better or it's going to make you happier, that it's going to somehow bring about a peace that you need, right? And that's, I don't know if you've ever been, the development of television without commercials is a beautiful thing. But if you ever see commercials, sometimes you'll see one and you'll be like, what are they even selling? Right? It's because what they're offering you is a vision of the good life. These systems are always at work on us. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, when he's talking about the armor of God, and it's cute, right? We talk about the armor of God and we think about the different pieces, and then we buy little plastic armor sets for our kids, right? And they dress up in the armor of God and they're off to fight, I don't know. Yeah. But Paul says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers. Whose image is on the coin? Against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Those are some really big ideas and concepts. And these powers, these authorities, they operate within the systems that we've created, right? The monetary, I know, it's funny. She's like, I don't know if it's time to wrap it up or if it's, preach, preacher. These powers are at work in the different systems and organizations and governments and businesses that we have built as humans, right? Rome is a system. It's created by sinful people, right? Who are also people made in the image of God. Think about our church. We just got done with a long series about resisting abuse in churches, and particularly in this church. Why do we have to talk about that? We have to talk about that because this church, for better or worse, is an institution. It has to be managed in some ways like that. And the reason that we have to guard against abuse is because this institution was created, and it is inhabited, and it's led by people who sin, who are also people made in the image of God. It's not wholly good and it's not wholly bad, and it's hard to sometimes tell where the allegiances lie and what are the desires that are operating here, what's working, what's driving this thing. And how do we resist it? I want to point out the way that the people respond to Jesus' answer, right? Obviously, in order to partner together, the Pharisees and the Herodians have to think they've got a pretty iron-proof plan here, right? It's not worth working with your enemy unless you can really get your enemy's enemy, right? And yet, somehow Jesus evades them, eludes them with his answer. And when they heard his answer, this is verse 22, they marveled. They were amazed. They were shocked. It was awe-inspiring, the way that Jesus wiggles his way, jukes his way. It's football season, right? The way that he gets out of this. They're amazed. And what's funny to me is that we aren't. Either because of familiarity with this text or our assumption that we know what Jesus meant. We're not amazed. We're like, yeah, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, give to God what's God's. Easy. The problem with common sense is that it's common to sinful people. It's common to a cultural understanding. And our culture isn't neutral. It's not all bad. It's not all good. I hope I'm making that clear. I don't want to talk that to death. Are you all with me? Okay, good. The good parts work on us. The bad parts work on us. And as Americans, we have a very specific culture that imbues us with a really specific idea of what it means to exercise common sense. But I want to point a couple things out to you from the text. First of all, Jesus doesn't have the coin, right? Jesus doesn't reach into his own pocket and say, look at this coin. Whose image is on it? Whose inscription? He has to ask his opponents, the ones who are trying to trap him. He says, whose image is on the coin? Show me the coin for the tax. And they bring him a denarius. He says, whose likeness and whose inscription is this? And they say, it's Caesar's. Caesar's image. The reason that Jesus doesn't have this coin on him is not because he either is in favor of paying the temple tax or he's opposed to paying the temple tax. And this is a Roman tax that's pushed on the Jewish people by Rome in order to allow them to worship their own God freely. That's called religious freedom. The reason that Jesus doesn't have this coin in his pocket is because it has an image on it. Jesus isn't about to be breaking the second commandment. He's already told us in the sermon in Matthew chapter 6, you cannot serve two masters. Either you will love one and hate the other, or you will hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And he's not just talking about money. He's talking about all of the systems that make money what it is. Have you ever I know talking with Bruce, if you talk with Bruce, he's going to talk with you about gold-backed currency. And he's going to say the way that everything went downhill is when we gave that up. All right? But have you ever just marveled at the fact that you've got paper in your pocket and you can go around and buy things with it? What makes this paper more valuable than this paper? This paper has teaching on it. That paper does not. Mammon is more than just money. Mammon, what Jesus calls out when he says you can't serve mammon, he's not just saying you can't be greedy. He's saying you cannot serve all of the systems that make money what it is, and all of the systems that make the world go round, and God. You obviously have to live in the systems that make money what it is. You have to live in the systems that make the world go round, but you cannot serve them. Jesus could just as easily say in this passage, you cannot serve God and Caesar. You cannot serve God and Caesar. This is actually a passage that's way more about idolatry than it is about anything else. I think a lot of us assume that when Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, that we say things like, yeah. First of all, for most of us, it's not like a religious question whether or not we pay taxes. That's more of like a legal question, right? You don't pay your taxes, you will go to jail. A lot of us are not, we don't like to pay taxes maybe, or all of them. But for us, it's not like, we're not thinking about like, oh man, if I pay my taxes this year, am I somehow not worshiping God? This is about idolatry, which actually informs the Malachi text. The Malachi text isn't about being a generous giver at church, it's about idolatry. Do you trust God or idols? Are you withholding your tithe because you're trusting in an idol instead of the God of Israel who promises to fill his house with food enough for everyone? We don't disappear. We can't suddenly just not live in these systems, live in these contexts, live in these cultures, and yet we have to remain fully Christian, and we have to discern then how and when to participate. And here's the uneasy wading into politics that I often do in the pulpit. If you feel like the Republican Party is just going to co-sign Christian values, if you feel like the Democratic Party is just going to co-sign Christian values, right? The way that they're amazed at Jesus' answer makes me think that there are some times when we participate in our political or monetary or business systems in the world, we should be surprised sometimes the way that we participate. We should find ourselves saying like, wow, that's something I never thought I would do, but I guess in order to follow Jesus, I have to go that way this time. Are you with me? Stanley Hauerwas says, you know you have a problem, at least if you are a disciple of Jesus, when you suddenly have no more problems. You know you have a problem, at least if you are a disciple of Jesus, when you suddenly have no more problems. When it comes to politics, business, economics, government. What do we do then? A better translation, maybe not literally of the words that are there in the Greek, but of the meaning of the words in the Greek, is not, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's, but send back to Caesar his own crap. This isn't about paying taxes. This is about resisting idols. Send back to Caesar the things that are his. Give to God what is God's. And what is God's? The Psalms tell us, the cattle on 1,000 hills, all the princes of the earth, all the wealth in the world, all the glory and power and honor that is due to his name. Everything belongs to God. Send back to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. Malachi. I've already jumped ahead, and I've got to wrap this thing up. It's not about tithing, right? It made me really uncomfortable to read that while we were collecting the offering, because I'm just like thinking about TV preachers, right? Send me $5, and I'll send you a blessing. It's not about tithing. It's about trusting God over the idols that are offered to us or that we make for ourselves. How does this relate to grace and judgment? Just know that God's not only going to judge individuals, right? The psalm that we read this morning, I'm going to take it off of your stand. Well, maybe not. Did you already take it off, Ben? There was just one line in there, and I didn't write it down, and I should have. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Give to God what is God's. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. When God judges, he's not just going to line us up in a single file line and say, yes, no, yes, no, yes, yes, no, no. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with wrath, anger, fear, equity, is what the psalm says. He will judge the peoples with equity. The last line of the psalm is, he will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness. God isn't just going to line up all of us in a long line and judge us one by one. He's going to judge the systems of this world, and that is grace to those of us who are dominated by them, whether we know it or not. To the degree that we are dominated by them, he will judge the peoples with equity. God's judgment of wrong, of evil, of idolatry, it will open our eyes to see. It can open our eyes to see today. and it can set us free to follow Jesus all of our lives.